Machine Gun Kelly unexpectedly showed up at Lil Durk's murder-for-hire trial, and his appearance caught everyone off guard. But it was the reaction from Durk's side that really got people talking. Here's what happened. A surprise celebrity sighting opened Lil Durk's murder-for-hire trial alongside the rapper's wife and father, MGK, who showed up at a federal courthouse in Los Angeles to watch the proceedings and viewed the day's events from an overflow room rather than the main courtroom. No advance word, no statement, no publicist prepping a headline. He just showed up. Sources with direct knowledge told TMZ that his appearance was unexpected, even though he and Durk go back. The two connect through one specific moment, a live version of Durk's The Voice from 2023's Amazon Music Live with Lil Durk, where MGK joined in on guitar. That's it, one performance, 3 years ago, and yet here he was, sitting through federal murder testimony for a friend he'd shared a stage with exactly once in public memory. The overflow room detail matters more than it sounds. That's the room they put you in. When the main courtroom is packed and they don't have space, not a VIP box, not a special section, just a spillover room with a video feed, same as anybody else who couldn't get a seat. Baker was among several people who turned out to support Durk, and the Los Angeles Times reported that the rapper's family and supporters packed the courtroom for opening statements. MGK wasn't the special guest. He was one more body trying to get in. He wasn't alone in showing up either. This is where the title's promise stops being about one celebrity and starts being about who actually circled around Durk when the stakes turned real. Alongside the rapper's wife and father, the gallery told its own story. India Royale sat there. Dante Banks, Durk's father, known in the streets as Big Durk, sat there too. And according to later reporting, after the lunch break, Machine Gun Kelly arrived and sat in the front row for nearly 2 hours of testimony, and he chatted with Dante in the hallway before entering. That hallway conversation is the closest thing anyone has to Durk's camp reacting to MGK in real time. It wasn't Durk himself. He was already inside, seated at the defense table, watching prosecutors lay out their case. But his father greeting MGK before letting him into the room says something. This wasn't a stranger being let through security out of curiosity. This was somebody who knew he'd be welcomed. The timing of the visit is what makes it land the way it does. This wasn't a bond hearing or arraignment. This was day one of opening statements in a trial, where prosecutors alleged Lil Durk was the architect of a 2022 revenge killing, while his defense says co-defendant Kavon Grant is lying to cut a deal. With Durk facing life in prison, as prosecutors laid out the allegations, MGK picked the single heaviest day to walk in. And what he walked into wasn't light. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Weiner told jurors, Durk became consumed with revenge after King Von was killed in Atlanta, saying this case is not about music, it's about murder, while describing an alleged plan to stalk, hunt, and kill Quando Rondo. Weiner wasn't easing into it. He went straight at the most damaging theory the government has, that Durk turned grief into a contract. MGK sat through that, then he sat through more. The trial proceedings included viewing graphic evidence with YouTuber Charles Ross, known online as Trap Lore Ross, and Machine Gun Kelly reportedly present. During the presentation of violent footage and autopsy photos, that's not a detail you volunteer for out of curiosity. Autopsy photos in a federal courtroom don't get shown for effect. They get shown because a person is dead, and the government is trying to prove who's responsible. Here's where the story splits into two threads people can't stop chasing. One, what MGK's presence actually means for Durk personally. Whether it's a signal to the jury, a signal to Durk, or just a friend doing what friends do. Two, what's actually happening inside that trial, because the case Durk is fighting for his freedom in is far bigger and far messier than a single celebrity sighting. Multiple outlets picked up the same detail, almost word for word within hours. Lil Durk's federal murder-for-hire trial opened Monday in Los Angeles with a packed courtroom, emotional testimony, and a surprise celebrity appearance. That phrase, surprise celebrity appearance, started attaching itself to MGK's name across radio blogs, hip-hop outlets, and entertainment wires simultaneously. Whatever this trial was going to be about, MGK's face in that gallery became the entry point for millions of people who'd never heard of Kavon Grant or the Beverly Center shooting before that Monday. But the reason MGK's visit hit as hard as it did isn't really about him. It's about the size of what Durk is up against. Lil Durk, the rapper whose real name is Durk Banks, was first arrested in October 2024, with authorities alleging he placed a bounty on and ordered the murder of rival rapper Quando Rondo, whose real name is Tyquan Bowman. That's not a drug charge. That's not a gun charge. That's murder for hire, carrying the kind of sentence that ends a life, not just a career. So before we go any further into what MGK's appearance means, We have to understand what he actually walked into, because the trial itself is the real story, and MGK just happened to be sitting inside it when the cameras started paying attention. To understand why MGK sitting in a courtroom became national news, you have to understand what's on the line for the man he came to support. Banks was arrested in Broward County, Florida on October 17, 2024, along with 5 of his associates from OTF. He wasn't picked up at home or pulled over on a routine stop. He was arrested while attempting to board a private jet to Italy, which prosecutors would later use to argue he was a flight risk, a factor that's kept him locked up ever since. The theory of the case, as prosecutors have laid it out, starts with grief and ends with a shooting. Federal prosecutors allege Durk sought revenge after his friend and fellow rapper King Von was fatally shot in 2020. Outside an Atlanta hookah lounge, Von wasn't just a label mate. He was a rapper who represented only the family, the record label and collective Durk founded, which was Von's home before his killing. The government says that loss didn't stay grief for long. It turned into a target list. Prosecutors claim members of Durk's crew later targeted rapper Quando Rondo in California in 2022. And the specifics of that night are where the case gets its weight. Investigators say the group shadowed Quando Rondo around Los Angeles before gunmen attacked near the Beverly Center and fired more than a dozen shots. Quando Rondo survived, but his cousin Xavier, Lil Pab Robinson, was killed during the attack that prosecutors say was intended for the rapper. That's the core tragedy sitting underneath everything. A bounty allegedly meant for one rapper that ended up killing someone else's family member instead. And the money trail, prosecutors say they've traced runs straight through Durk's own business operations. The Justice Department alleges that OTF-linked funds covered flights and lodging, while a credit card linked to Durk was used during the operation. Prosecutors say they even have Durk's own words. They cite a message from Durk's phone, telling an associate, "Don't book no flights under no names involved with me." To the government, that's a man trying to cover his tracks. To the defense, it's a fragment being read the way the prosecution wants it read. And Durk's defense isn't conceding an inch. His attorney, Marissa Goldberg, placed responsibility on Kayvon Cuz Grant, the former personal assistant now cooperating with federal prosecutors. The defense strategy, in plain terms, is this. The man telling the story, Durk, is the man who actually pulled the strings, and he's only telling that story now because it gets him a lighter sentence. Goldberg told the jury there was very little to tie Banks to the shooting, other than the testimony of Grant and 2 other cooperating witnesses, all of whom have pled guilty to murder and are hoping for reduced sentences, and that there's no evidence anyone paid or promised to pay any of the shooters. There is no money to follow, there's no evidence of a payment, no evidence of a promise. That's the entire defense in one line. No money, no proof. Just a cooperating witness with a motive to point the finger somewhere else. The co-defendants are running their own versions of the same argument. Wilson's attorney, Craig Harbaugh, told the jury his client was simply a passenger who had nothing to do with the shooting, arguing Kayvon Grant was the perpetrator who went to LA to pursue his vendetta against Quando Rondo. He set up everything. Every defense in that courtroom is converging on Grant as the actual architect. But the prosecution isn't relying only on one witness. They've built a wall of corroborating cooperators. Prosecutors told jurors that Kayvon Grant, known as OTF Vonnie, Casey OTF Jam Hester, and Keith Flacca Jones, are cooperating witnesses who will take the stand against Durk. 3 men who were allegedly in the car, allegedly pulled triggers, all now working with the government instead of against it. The government says Durk was consumed with revenge and financed a team to hunt down Quando Rondo, while Durk's defense says prosecutors have the wrong man, and that Kayvon Grant and the very witnesses now cooperating with the government are where the jury should be looking. That's the entire trial in 2 sentences. Everyone agrees someone hunted Quando Rondo down. Nobody agrees on who gave the order. There's also a physical evidence trail that doesn't depend on anyone's testimony at all. An LAPD detective testified he identified the suspected shooters by obtaining detailed GPS records from the company that rented Grant, a white BMW seen following Quando Rondo's vehicle, records that led him to an In-N-Out Burger. After the shooting, where surveillance video showed the men in the parking lot, and the detective matched the men to shoes visible in surveillance footage, tracing one man's pants to a specific boutique. This isn't a case built purely on flipped witnesses. It's stitched together with rental car records and shoe prints and receipts. The prosecution also showed evidence that 4 black ski masks were purchased by Grant on the morning of Aug. 18. The day before the shooting, small detail, but it's exactly the kind of detail that turns he said into something jurors can hold on to. None of this happened overnight, and the road to trial itself became its own drama. The case almost didn't start on schedule at all. Before MGK ever walked through those courthouse doors, Durk's team had already spent close to 2 years, just trying to get the case in front of a jury on terms they thought were fair. Lil Durk's murder-for-hire trial was postponed until May 2026, with over 30,000 pages of evidence complicating the case, and prosecutors reviewing digital files and surveillance footage while Durk remained in custody after multiple denied bond requests, including a $4.5 million bail package. Even with an offer of millions on the table, no judge was letting him walk before trial. The delay was granted because of the unusual and so complex nature of the case, with prosecutors alleging Durk directed OTF members to carry out a hit on Quando Rondo, and working through hundreds of gigabytes of digital material, including surveillance video and audio recordings. That's not a case you can prep for in a few months. Even the government needed more time. Then, just weeks before the trial was actually set to start, prosecutors tried to change the shape of the case entirely. Durk claimed the feds pulled a fast one, completely changing their case against him just weeks before trial, and wanted the judge to either break apart the case into separate chunks or throw the whole thing out. His team had spent nearly 2 years building a defense around one set of charges, only to watch prosecutors try to fold in more. In June 2026, Banks and his associates were charged with violations of the Violent Crimes in Aid of Racketeering Activity statute, specifically murder in aid of racketeering. New charges tied to a separate killing entirely. Prosecutors wanted to connect it to a Jan 27, 2022 killing of an alleged rival gang member in Chicago, and Durk's lawyers said that had nothing to do with the case they'd spent years preparing. The hearing over that decision turned tense fast. Lead prosecutor Ian Yaniello argued the charges were connected to the original case, since the alleged 2022 shooting was done on behalf of a gang, but the judge wasn't convinced, calling the bundling of unrelated cases a calculated move by the prosecution, and adding that prosecutors had over a year to bring the charges if they believed they were relevant. The judge didn't hide his skepticism, telling prosecutors flatly, "You treat that as a feature, and I treat that as a bug." That ruling went in Durk's favor. Judge Michael W. Fitzgerald granted Lil Durk's motion to sever, handing the defense a pretrial victory, with the newly added Chicago-related counts now set to be tried separately, while Durk's Los Angeles murder-for-hire trial remains set to begin, and Fitzgerald saying the government failed to show it would be prejudiced by 2 trials. It was the first real win Durk's defense had scored in nearly 2 years of fighting, and it came less than 6 weeks before opening statements. His lead attorney didn't hide how personal that win felt. She said it was one of those days that makes it rewarding to be a trial attorney, when a judge takes everything submitted and goes through it thoroughly, adding our innocent client, Durk Banks, is waiting, and that they were looking forward to finally being in that courtroom for the trial that we've been working on and preparing for 22 months. 22 months of preparation? That's the number that puts MGK's 2-hour visit in perspective. By the time a friend walked into that overflow room to watch a single afternoon of testimony, Durk's legal team had already been living inside this case for nearly 2 years, fighting over what evidence would even be allowed in front of a jury. And even with the severance win, Durk still wasn't going home. Prosecutors had announced they would not seek the death penalty, and investigators reportedly found no incriminating evidence on his iCloud or Twitter accounts, but he remained detained without bail. A judge denied his latest release attempt, citing flight risk concerns and the gravity of the charges. No death penalty was one relief. Continued detention was not. Through all of it, the person standing closest to Durk wasn't a label mate or a fellow rapper. It was his wife. If MGK's appearance told one story, the people who'd been there from the beginning told another. Quieter, but longer running. Lil Durk's longtime partner, India Royale, had been standing firmly by his side through what may be their biggest test yet. A couple who'd been together for nearly a decade. By the time the trial finally opened, that's not a relationship that started with cameras in the courtroom. It's one that's now being lived out in front of them. She hadn't been quiet about it either. India made a public declaration of loyalty, sharing a photo of the pair on her Instagram story and adding, "The whole world can go sour on you, I'm never switching up." That was posted before the trial even started, back when the case was still working through pre-trial motions. She'd had to defend that loyalty publicly more than once. India Royale clapped back at commentator Myron Gaines, and more general rumors that she was leaving Lil Durk behind amid his trial, after some people speculated she was moving on from him while he was in prison. The rumors came with receipts attached, old photos, out-of-context posts, and she shut them down fast, telling her critics they were taking it too far now. Once the actual trial started, she showed up and stayed composed, even when it clearly wasn't easy. One viral moment involved India Royale leaving the courtroom, though a source close to the family clarified that despite the circumstances, she remained composed and continued to stand by Durk and his family. Whatever made her step out that day, she came back. People who were actually in the room described her the same way. She was described as very composed, very eloquent, very classy, not speaking to any of the media, there to support her husband, with her family also there, aligned with Durk's mother. That's the picture that forms around Durk in that courtroom. Not a solo defendant, but a man surrounded by the same 3 or 4 people, day after day, while the government builds its case in front of a jury. Durk's father sat in that same row. Seated in the gallery were his wife, India Royale, and his father, Dante Banks, the same Dante who greeted MGK in the hallway and led him into the courtroom that afternoon. Big Durk, as he's known, has been a fixture at nearly every hearing since the arrest. That's the context that makes MGK's arrival mean something different than a celebrity photo op. He didn't crash a scene that was built for cameras. He walked into a small, tired, tight circle of people who'd been doing this for nearly 2 years, and he sat with them. There's also a wider circle outside the courthouse that never gets inside at all. Following one day of trial, supporters of Banks gathered outside the courthouse, holding Free Durk signs and playing the rapper's music, while cooperating witnesses and detectives testified about ski masks and GPS records inside. People who'd never met him were standing outside blasting his songs on the sidewalk. And the trial itself is now bleeding into that same music the fans outside were playing, because prosecutors decided Durk's own lyrics belong in evidence. This is the part of the case that turns Durk's career against him in the courtroom. And it's also the part that explains why his defense is fighting so hard on 2 fronts at once. The case could also bring Durk's music directly into the courtroom, with prosecutors expected to present some of his lyrics and music videos as evidence, while the defense has argued that the government could wrongly interpret artistic expression as proof of criminal intent. This isn't a new tactic in cases against rappers, but it hits differently when the artist facing it built an entire label around channeling real loss into songs. The prosecution alleged that the song "Pissed Me Off," released by Banks in 2021, showed intent to enact revenge on those responsible for Von's death. A song written and released the year before the shooting, now being read back in a federal courtroom as a motive statement. Goldberg pushed back on that theory directly to the jury. She told them the government would show Banks' songs and lyrics and try to say it's hatred, insisting instead that was a channeling of emotions through his artwork. Her argument is straightforward. Grief that goes into a song booth isn't the same as grief that goes into a bounty. She went further, framing his whole career as the target. This is art. This is performance. This is what he did for a living, she told jurors, trying to draw a hard line between the version of Durk, who tours arenas and releases albums, and the version prosecutors say ordered a hit from behind a record label's finances. The prosecution isn't backing off that framing, though. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Weiner told the jury, "This case is not about music. It's about murder," adding that Durk was consumed with revenge and was pressured from fans to avenge the death of King Von. That line about fan pressure is a detail that keeps surfacing. The idea that Durk wasn't just personally grieving, but publicly expected by his own audience to respond. Meanwhile, the label at the center of this, Only the Family, is being cast by the government as something closer to a criminal enterprise than a music collective. Weiner accused the label of functioning as a criminal gang, a label that had already produced a Grammy-winning collaboration and multiple chart-topping projects before any of these charges surfaced. And the man everyone in that courtroom keeps circling back to, Kevon Grant, has his own complicated history tangled inside the label. The defense argued Grant was present when Von was killed, was also there during a May 2021 shooting attempt involving Quando Rondo in Georgia, and was present during Robinson's 2022 killing. 3 violent incidents, one man present at all of them, and now that same man cooperating with the government against his former boss. Grant's cousin relationship to the victim side of the story adds another layer entirely. Prosecutors allege Banks orchestrated an attempt to kill Quando Rondo, as retaliation for King Von's death, and Grant was a cousin to Von. The man the defense says orchestrated everything was related to the person whose death started the whole chain of events. As for what's still ahead, the heaviest testimony hasn't happened yet, with Vonnie, Jam, and Flacca still expected to take the stand. Some of the most consequential testimony in Durk's fight for his freedom has yet to come. Everything the public has seen so far, the opening statements, the detective's GPS trail, MGK in the front row, is still just the setup. The three men who were allegedly in the car that night haven't spoken yet. The trial is expected to continue for at least 3 weeks, which means there's a long runway left before a jury decides anything. MGK's visit was one afternoon inside a case that's been building for nearly 2 years and still has weeks to go. Whether he comes back for the verdict, nobody's said. But for one day, in an overflow room with a video feed and folding chairs, a friend who once picked up a guitar for a song called The Voice sat and listened while prosecutors described exactly